Today's class on rhetoric will focus on these ways of describing. Okay, what are the ways? So this class will focus on how rhetoric is implied in literature. What is rhetoric? Obviously, what are the classifications of rhetoric, followed by how it is applied, or what are the names. Clear? Then we will be focusing on simile and metaphor, and obviously with examples to make you understand. And this class will end with how this conversion from simile to metaphor and metaphor to simile can be done. Okay, so hope you will be able to identify simile and metaphor by the end of this class. So before we go into what is rhetoric and how rhetoric can be analyzed, or what type of rhetoric can be analyzed, what we should know that from where this term rhetoric comes. Okay, the term rhetoric originates from the Greek word rhetor, R-H-E-T-O-R. Okay, it originates from the Greek word rhetor, which means a public speaker. Clear? So rhetor in Greek language means a public speaker. So if you have heard of any public speaker, the speeches of any public speaker, you have seen that he brings in allusions, he brings in so many ornaments, he brings in so many figures of speech. Why? Because his main idea, his main focus is to grab your attention. Okay, তার মূল উদ্দেশ্যটা কি? তার মূল উদ্দেশ্যটা হচ্ছে এইখানটায় যে শুনছে তোমার কথা, যার উদ্দেশ্যে সে বলছে, তার অ্যাটেনশনটাকে গ্র্যাব করার জন্য। Clear? So the public speaker, it literally means the art of a public speaker. Okay, it is not just the public speaker, but it is the art of public speaking. Not just the public speaker, but public speaking. So it is the ability. Okay, and this ability is very essential. This ability is very essential for the oratorial purposes. Why? As I said, because it is used to grab the attention. শুধু চোখের জলেই হচ্ছে ভাষণ দিলে হচ্ছে লোকে ইমপ্রেসড হবে না, but you have to use certain ornamental language which will be helpful in determining your course of action or the success of your speech. Clear? So you might question me, why then you are speaking in a English literature class, as you are talking about speech. Why you are speaking this in a English literature class? Because this is not just limited to speeches. Okay, several writers, several poets have used this rhetorics, the figures of speech, in order to ornament the poetry and several other literary works. Clear? So what we find here is that you can define rhetoric as an art which is intended for swaying the feelings or emotions of the hearer or the reader. Okay, it is the whole art of elegant and effective composition, whether it is spoken or written, and it embodies the important rules of whatever may be a good or graceful composition that has or that need to have the power to impress. And not just impress, but to persuade and convince the listener or the reader to follow or to understand the orator's point of view or the writer's point of view. Okay, so have you understood? So it shows that rhetoricটা কি? rhetoricটা হচ্ছে একটা আর্ট, যে আর্টের থ্রু দিয়ে তুমি কি তোমার ফিলিংসগুলো কেমন করে হচ্ছে বলবে, যে ফিলিংসগুলো কি করবে, যে ফিলিংসগুলো যে শুনবে তোমার কথা, সেই কথা শুনেই হচ্ছে তোমার একদম সুইড হয়ে যাবে, একদম যেন মন একদম ভরে যাবে, তার কথা শুনতে ইচ্ছা করবে। ক্লিয়ার? অ্যান্ড what will happen, it will be able to impress others, যারা শুনবে তারাই হচ্ছে ইমপ্রেস হয়ে যাবে। You have seen the speeches of several prime ministers, several chief ministers, several leaders, okay, political leaders or freedom fighters who have given tremendously effective speeches, right? Tremendously effective speeches which had left an impact on the masses, and for that they have voted for those people. Clear? তাদের জন্য ভোট করেছে। ঠিক সিমিলারলি হচ্ছে এমন এমন অনেক পোয়েম আছে যে পোয়েমগুলো কি করেছে, যে পোয়েমগুলোর মধ্যে দিয়ে রেটরিক্যাল ইউজের জন্য, তাদের শব্দর চয়েসের জন্য, বিকজ অফ দ্য চয়েস অফ দ্য ওয়ার্ডস, বিকজ অফ দ্য চয়েস অফ দ্য ইমেজারি, বিকজ অফ দ্য চয়েস অফ দ্য অর্নামেন্টাল ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ, they have able to, those poems were able to impress the readers or the listeners. Clear? And তার ফলে কি হবে, তার ফলে যে লিসনার্সরা রয়েছে তারা এবল হতে পারবে, they will be able to understand the whole of the orator or the orators or the writers point of view. Clear? So এই যে রেটরিকটা কি করছে, it actually expresses or it ornaments a simple statement. Clear? The rhetorical ornaments are actually used for converting simple statements with much more, it defines or it places this in a much more beautiful way. Clear? So the main purpose is to teach or to add a beauty, a grace, a kind of style of composition is added to it. Clear? So what we find here is that these things, the rhetoric's main purpose is to beautify the language. Clear? But from your exam point of view, what you have to do, you have to find out these beauty elements, these beautiful elements belong to which kind of rhetoric. Okay, there are several kinds of rhetorics, namely simile, metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, antithesis, climax, anticlimax, and several others, transferred epithet, personification, pun, onomatopoeia, innuendo, irony, and several others. Okay, so what is your purpose? Your purpose is to understand what is this rhetoric. You have to identify that rhetoric, and then you have to state why are you saying this rhetoric is this. So how will you say that? You will say that this beautifying ornament belongs to this category, এর মধ্যে এই characteristics রয়েছে, this ornament has these characteristics, and these characteristics belong to this kind of rhetoric, that's why this beautiful line belongs to this rhetoric. Okay, so কি বলছে, যে এই যে তোমার কোন একটা লাইন পেলে, you see a line and it appeals to you that this has some ornament, ঠিক আছে, তার মধ্যে কোন একটা গ্লোরিফিকেশন রয়েছে, ঠিক আছে, তার মধ্যে কোনো একটা বিউটি রয়েছে, তুমি কি করলে, সেইটাকে চয়েস করলে, তুমি তারপর কি দেখলে তার মধ্যে কি বিউটি রয়েছে, কি ক্যারেক্টারিস্টিক্স রয়েছে। ওকে, সেই ক্যারেক্টারিস্টিক্স গুলো তুমি বেছে নিলে, সেই লাইনের মধ্যে সেই ক্যারেক্টারিস্টিক্স গুলো তুমি বেছে নিয়ে তুমি কি করলে, তুমি সেটাকে ম্যাচ করে দেখলে কোন রেটরিকের সাথে, এই যে এতগুলো নাম বললাম, ওনোম্যাটোপোইয়া, পেরিফ্রেসিস, পার্সনিফিকেশন, পান, সিমিলি, মেটাফর, মেটানমি, সিনেকডকি, ট্রান্সফার্ড এপিথেট, কোন হচ্ছে রেটরিকের সাথে ম্যাচ করছে তার ক্যারেক্টারিস্টিক্স, যেটার সাথে ম্যাচ করবে তাহলে ওই লাইনটা হচ্ছে সেই rhetoric, and you have to explain that simple thing. But for that you have to understand each and every rhetoric. Okay, you have to understand each and every rhetoric in order to identify those rhetorics from the passage that you will get. Okay, so before we go into several rhetorics that I mentioned, what you need to know here is that this rhetoric is divided into some, it has several classes. Okay, namely it has 7. Okay, there are seven main classes of figures of speech. Clear? So the number one class, or the number one group of rhetoric is, it is the rhetoric on similarity, or figures of speech based on similarity. Okay, figures of speech based on similarity. So this rhetoric will focus on the similarity that is found in different objects. Okay, so under this figures of speech, you have number one, simile, simile. Okay, number two is metaphor, metaphor. Clear? Then there are also other three. It is allegory, parable, and fable. Okay, so these five falls under the category figures of speech based on similarity. Clear? Next figures of speech is, next classification is based on association. Okay, so it is based on association between obviously two different things, two apparently different things which are associated together. Okay, so the rhetoric which falls under this association, these figures of speech based on association, are metonymy, metonymy, then synecdoche, 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 then transferred epithet, epithet, epithet means adjective. Okay, then it is allusion. Clear? So these four falls under based on association, figures of speech based on association. Clear? Next is the figures of speech, or the classification is based on contrast or difference. Okay, the figures of speech which is based on the contrast or the difference, that is the rhetorics which falls under that are antithesis, epigram, oxymoron, climax, anticlimax, and condensed sentence. Okay, so what we find here is that I will explain everything in several classes. Okay, I will explain each of these in several classes. Don't worry, I am just naming them. Next, it is based on imagination. Okay, figures of speech based on imagination. Rhetorics under these are named as personification, apostrophe, pathetic fallacy, hyperbole, and vision. Clear? These are the rhetorics which falls under based on imagination. The fifth classification is based on indirectness. Okay, based on indirectness. The rhetorics under this category are innuendo, irony, periphrasis, 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 and euphemism. Clear? This is the classification based on indirectness. Next, it is based on sound. The rhetoric which is based on sound, শব্দের উপর, আওয়াজের উপর. ঠিক আছে? You have to focus on the rhyming. You have to focus on the sound that has been made by the words. Clear? It is the rhetorics based on sound are pun, pun. Number 2, onomatopoeia, onomatopoeia. Clear? Next, the third is alliteration, and fourth is assonance. Okay, though assonance falls under the matter of prosody. Okay, you know rhetoric and prosody falls under your syllabus, I hope. Though assonance falls under the matter of prosody, but in some cases it is kept under rhetoric also. Clear? So what we find here is that these 3 or 4 are based on sound. Clear? Figures of speech based on sound. The last one, the last classification is based on construction. Okay, so the rhetoric will be dependent on how the writing is constructed. Okay, how the letters are constructed, how the speech is constructed, how the lines are constructed in the poem. Okay, so you will this is the most easiest one. Okay, this is the easiest one of all these classifications. Number 1 is interrogation. Okay, you already know what an interrogation is, right? Interrogation means asking, questioning. Clear? So any rhetoric which showcases this quality will have this tendency of asking question. Clear? Then you will easily understand that this is interrogation. Then exclamation. Clear? Exclamation, you know, right? So what we find here is that these are based on also there are others also. It has a long list. It has chiasmus. I will explain everything. I will explain each and every one. Don't worry. Maybe not in this class, but in next classes. Keep following. Okay, so it is zeugma, followed by chiasmus is zeugma. It is hendiadys, hendiadys. Zeugma is zedugma. Okay, then it is litotes, litotes. Okay, then is hyperbaton, asyndeton, hyperbaton. Asyndeton is asyndeton, asyndeton. Polysyndeton, polysyndeton, polysyndeton. Then is epanophora, epanophora, epanophora. Then is phallologia, phallologia. Okay, so these are the most prominent rhetorics that are found in English language, and their classifications. What you need to know here is that the differences. Okay, the differences between these rhetorics, what are the characteristics of these rhetorics are. Clear? So let's move on to the first category. Okay, the first category is figures of speech. Figures of speech based on similarity, right? So as I have told you before, that figures which are based on similarity, or the rhetorics which are based on similarity, the number 1 is simile. Okay, simile, then metaphor. Okay, so what is a simile? In a simile, what we find, in a simile there is an explicit comparison. An explicit comparison is made between two unallied things or ideas. Okay, so you have to understand the meaning of the words. এই ওয়ার্ডসগুলোর মানে তোমায় বুঝতে হবে। তো what is the first chief word? What is the first main wordটা কি এখানটায়? Explicit comparison. What does explicit comparison mean? Comparison মানে তোমরা জানো, you know the meaning of comparison, right? Comparison মানে কোনো কিছুর সাথে কোনো কিছু তুলনা করা। ঠিক আছে, কিরকম তুলনা করবে? How the comparison will be? Comparison will be explicit. And what does explicit mean? Explicit means স্পষ্ট, that means clear. Okay, so a clear comparison will be made between two unallied things or ideas. Unallied things মানে তুমি যেগুলোকে দেখে কোনো কম্পারিজন তুমি করতে পারো না, দুটো অপোজিট জিনিস বলতে পারো। ক্লিয়ার? দুটো ডিফারেন্ট জিনিস বলতে পারো, টু ডিফারেন্ট থিংস, টু ডিফারেন্ট আইডিয়াস এর মধ্যে, টু ডিস্টিংক্টলি ডিফারেন্ট থিংস অর আইডিয়াস আর কম্পেয়ার্ড ক্লিয়ারলি। ওকে, দুটো কমপ্লিটলি ডিফারেন্ট জিনিসকে হচ্ছে কি করছে, সেটাকে অ্যাকচুয়ালি এখানটায় প্লেস করা হচ্ছে, অ্যাকচুয়ালি একসাথে প্লেস করা হচ্ছে থ্রু আ কম্পারিজিং point. And what is that word, what is the word that is used over here for bringing in the similarity or bringing in this comparison? The word is as ba like. Okay, the two words that are used to bring in this comparison is as like, as comma like. Okay, so the simile refers to the clear detection of the point of similarity between two objects different in nature, okay, by the word like or as. Okay, like আর as দিয়ে কি করা হবে, like আর as দিয়ে দুটো অপোজিট জিনিস বা দুটো ডিফারেন্ট জিনিসের মধ্যে কম্পারিজন করা হবে। ক্লিয়ার? সো the definition of simile goes like this: simile is a figure of speech in which a comparison between two distinctly different things is explicitly made. Okay, the word explicitly is important. Okay, why it is important? Because this differentiates it with metaphor. I will come to that. Okay, তাহলে simile কি করছে? simile হচ্ছে একটা ফিগার অফ স্পিচ, যে ফিগার অফ স্পিচের মধ্যে একটা কম্পারিজন করছে, কার মধ্যে? দুটো অপোজিট জিনিসের মধ্যে বা দুটো কমপ্লিটলি ডিফারেন্ট জিনিসের মধ্যে। ক্লিয়ার? কি দিয়ে কম্পারিজন করছে? দ্য কম্পারিজিং ফ্যাক্টর অর দ্য এই যে কম্পারিজনটা হচ্ছে, সেই এই যে কম্পেয়ার করছে, সেই কম্পেয়ার করার যে ওয়ার্ডটা, দ্য ওয়ার্ড হুইচ ইজ ইউজড ফর কম্পেয়ারিং between these two things is like or as. ঠিক আছে, এই একটা এক্সাম্পল দিলে তোরা আরো ভালো বুঝতে পারবি। simplest example is I wandered lonely as a cloud. Okay, so what we see, there is this like. Okay, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Oh, here it is as. Okay, so what do you find? He is comparing himself with a cloud. Okay, it is as simple. You can see it is quite simple over here. He says that he is comparing himself to a cloud. Okay, সে নিজেকে একটা ক্লাউডের সাথে তুলনা করছে। কম্পারিজিং ফ্যাক্টরটা কি? এই যে তাকে হচ্ছে কম্পেয়ার করছে, সেই ফ্যাক্টরটা কি? সেই ফ্যাক্টরটা হচ্ছে লোনলি। দুজনেই হচ্ছে লোনলি, দুজনেই হচ্ছে ওয়ান্ডার করছে, দুজনেই হচ্ছে ঘুরে বেড়াচ্ছে। ক্লিয়ার? কিরকম করে? ক্লাউডের মতো হচ্ছে ঘুরে বেড়াচ্ছে। ক্লাউডও যেরকম লোনলি ঘুরে বেড়ায়, ঠিক সিমিলারলি সেও হচ্ছে লোনলি ঘুরে বেড়াচ্ছে। ক্লিয়ার? সো what I find here is that two things, two different things are compared here. What is I, that is a poet who is a human being, and a cloud. Okay, what is a cloud? It can exist at one moment and it cannot, right? Those two things which are completely different from one another are compared with a single objective, okay, or with a single comparison, or with a factor of comparison. একটা কমন জিনিস আছে তাদের মধ্যে, there is a common thing between these two different things, and that's why they can be compared. Okay, so also red as a rose is she. Okay, so the girl is being compared to a red rose. Okay, so the simplest way to find out rhetoric, which is simile, the simplest way to find out simile rhetoric is to see whether there is like or as in the line or not, or whether two different things are compared with like or as. সবথেকে সিম্পল ওয়ে তুই সিমিলি খুঁজে বার করার কি, সবথেকে সিম্পল ওয়ে হচ্ছে তোকে দেখতে হবে যে দুটো অপোজিট জিনিস বা দুটো ডিফারেন্ট জিনিসের মধ্যে কম্পারিজনটা আসছে কিনা। কম্পারিজনটা কিরকম করে করছে, কম্পারিজনটা করছে লাইক আর অ্যাজ দিয়ে কম্পারিজন হচ্ছে কিনা, তাহলেই সেটা সিমিলি। ওকে, সো what we find here is that I wandered lonely as a cloud, সেখানটাও কম্পারিজনটা দেখলি। দেন red as a rose is she, again rose, a red rose is compared to the girl, or the girl is compared to a red rose. The quality of the red rose এর সাথে একটা কোয়ালিটিটা কি রেডনেস এর সাথে হচ্ছে বা বিউটির সাথে হচ্ছে, বিউটিটা হচ্ছে ওই ফ্যাক্টর, দ্য কমন ফ্যাক্টর। ক্লিয়ার? সো there are several other examples. Her locks are yellow as gold. Then the burglar moves like a cat. Okay, so the moving is a common factor between the cat and the burglar. Okay, so the cat moves very quietly. Similarly, the burglar also moves very quietly. Okay, so these are the examples of simile. Okay, so now let's move on to metaphor. Okay, metaphor is quite similar to simile, but it has something different. Okay, what is the difference? In a metaphor, an implied comparison is made between two different things or ideas. Okay, in a simile, what you had an explicit comparison, and that's why I said there you have to understand the meanings of the words. Okay, in a metaphor, what you have? In a metaphor, you have implied comparison. Okay, so there are the two things are same. What are the two things? That the comparison will be made between two different things. In metaphor also, in simile also, two different things will be there and the comparison will be there. Clear? But the difference between metaphor and simile is that in simile there is explicit comparison. By explicit I mean clear. Okay, in metaphor what you will have implied comparison or implicit comparison. What does implicit comparison mean? Implicit means ujjo, which is not clear. Okay, the comparison point or the I wandered lonely as a cloud. This comparing point is what? The comparing point is wandered lonely, right? এই যে wandered lonely শব্দটা সেইটা কি দুটোই হচ্ছে, দুজনকেই হচ্ছে অ্যাসক্রাইব করা যাচ্ছে, পোয়েটকেও আবার হচ্ছে ক্লাউডকেও, right? So this is clearly stated there in simile, but in metaphor this comparing factor, okay, this comparing factor will be withheld, সেটাকে একটু লুকিয়ে রাখা হবে, ঠিক আছে? সেটা এত ক্লিয়ারলি বলা হবে না। Clear? It will be kept hidden. Clear? But you will be able to understood implicit, এটাকে উজ্জ করে রাখা হবে, ঠিক আছে? It will not be clearly stated. So metaphor is an informal or implied simile. Okay, it is an implied simile where the comparison exists implicitly in a metaphor, in any statement or identity between two different objects. Okay, so if I give you an example, you will clearly understand. So the simple thing is there will be two different things like the poet and the cloud. Okay, but their comparing point, the point of comparison will be kept hidden. ওকে, কোন বেসিসে হচ্ছে তাদের কম্পারিজনটা হচ্ছে সেটা হিডেন থাকবে, which will not be said clearly. Okay, and when it is not said clearly, then what we will find? We will not see the words like and as. Okay, you will not find the words like and as in metaphor. Clear? And you will be able to understand, you will have to find out what is the comparing point, কিসের বেসিসে কম্পেয়ার করছে, কোন ক্যারেক্টারিস্টিক্স এর উপর বেস করে কম্পেয়ার করা হচ্ছে। Okay, you need to understand on what ground this comparison is being made, which is kept hidden. Okay, or which is not hidden, which is unsaid. Okay, the comparing point is not said clearly. Okay, so if we define metaphor, as we have to define in exams, I am mentioning that metaphor is a figure of speech which contains an implied comparison in which a word or phrase which is ordinarily or primarily used for one thing is transferred to another without formally acknowledging that any comparison is made. Okay, so what we find here is that the comparison which will be made will be which will be implied one, and what we will find, it will be between several two different things. Okay, where the characteristics of one thing will be transferred to another, or the same comparison will be there between two different things. Comparison point will be between these two, and this comparison will be not acknowledged formally, মানে সবার সামনে হচ্ছে বলা হবে না। Clear? The most popular example of metaphor is camel is the sheep of the desert. Okay, camel is the sheep of the desert. So what are the two things that are being compared over here? Camel and sheep. Okay, ship. Okay, sheep, jahaj. So camel is the sheep of desert. Desert-এ জাহাজ হচ্ছে কে? Desert-এ জাহাজ হচ্ছে camel. And what is the comparison point? So there is this comparison between the camel and the sheep. And why? These are two different things. Obviously, camel is a living animal and sheep ki? Sheep at an object, right? At a mode of transportation. And this mode of transportation, this able to carry portions in rough voyages, in rough areas, that is the point of comparison between sheep and the camel. Okay, so এই যে দুজনের মধ্যে কম্পারিজন আনতে হবে, যেটা ইমপ্লিসিটলি বলছে, ঠিক আছে, সেইটা এখানটায় রয়েছে। সি ইন আই ওয়ান্ডার্ড লোনলি অ্যাজ আ ক্লাউড, ওয়ান্ডার্ড লোনলি, দোজ ওয়ার সেড উইদিন দ্য ওয়ার্ডস, within the sentence or the phrase, right? It is said within the poem's lines, right? But this comparison point between the camel and the sheep for transportation, the best way of transportation, is not mentioned anywhere in the line. Understood? যে এইখানে ক্যামেল আর যে শিপ রয়েছে, দুজনের কম্পারিজনটা কিসের উপর হচ্ছে? কম্পারিজনটা হচ্ছে মোড অফ ট্রান্সপোর্টের উপর। মোড অফ ট্রান্সপোর্ট ইন হোয়াট? ইন প্লেসেস উইচ ইজ নট ইজি টু ট্রাভেল, রাইট? সেই জায়গায় তাদের কম্পারিজন হচ্ছে। সেই কম্পারিজনটা কি লাইনের মধ্যে আছে? দেখবি নেই। ওয়ান্ডার্ড লোনলি যেটা লাইনের মধ্যে ছিল, ঠিক সিমিলারলি দেখ ক্যামেল আর শিপের মধ্যে ট্রান্সপোর্টেশনে হেল্প করছে। দে আর ভেরি হেল্পফুল ইন ট্রান্সপোর্টেশন ইন দেয়ার ওন স্ফিয়ার, ইন দেয়ার ওন প্লেসেস। সেইটা দেখ লাইনের মধ্যে মেনশন নেই। অ্যান্ড দ্যাট ইজ ওয়াই দিস ইজ অ্যান এক্সাম্পল অফ মেটাফর, because the point of comparison is withheld, it is implicit. Clear? Similarly, another example, he is the pillar of the state. He is the pillar of the state. State বলতে এখানটায় রাজ্য শুধু বলছে না, স্টেট বলতে এখানটায় নেশন বোঝাচ্ছে। ওকে, by state here means nation. Okay, so he here refers to the king, obviously, or a good political person. Clear? So he is being compared to a pillar. So see that there is no like, there is no as. এই দুটো words missing. These two words are missing in metaphors. Okay, so he is compared to, he is the pillar of the state. Why this comparison is made, or how, what is the comparison point? The point is pillar, and pillar supports something. Pillar supports the building. Okay, pillar supports a structure. Similarly, this state, this nation is being supported by a person, that is a political leader or the king. Okay, so the comparison point is supporting. Okay, তাদেরকে ধরে রাখার ক্যাপাসিটিটা রয়েছে কার, সাপোর্ট করার ক্যাপাসিটিটা রয়েছে কার, এই লোকটার। and what we see, these two things are completely opposite, right? These two things are, one is a human being and another is what, another is a pillar. Okay, at a material জিনিস, right? So what we find here is that তাদের মধ্যে যে comparisons গুলো হচ্ছে, সেই comparisons গুলো এখানটায় is still implicit, and that is why it is an example of metaphor. Clear? Also there are several other kinds of metaphor, namely mixed metaphor. You do not have to learn all those things for your UG syllabus. You can learn because knowledge needs no boundaries. Mixed metaphor, where the comparison is being made here, one-to-one comparison is made, right? In simple metaphors, one thing is compared to another, right? In mixed metaphor, what we see there is multiple comparison. Okay, one thing is compared to two different things. Clear? So that's why it is mixed metaphor. Then in strained metaphor, what we find, this metaphor is strained because this comparison is far-fetched, অনেকটা সুদূর description দিয়ে, অনেক irrelevant details দিয়ে, there are several irrelevant details which are dragged into the figures of speech to make this a metaphor. Okay, for example, you are reading Macbeth, or you have read Macbeth. From Macbeth you can see there is a line, here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood. Okay, his silver skin is covered with golden blood. It is an example of metaphor, but what we find, there is this comparison between gold and blood. Okay, and it is far-fetched because it refers to it cannot be destroyed, it cannot be easily destroyed, right? And this golden blood refers to the lineage Duncan belongs to. Okay, their family, their aristocracy. Okay, their golden blood cannot be gold. Okay, it cannot be of golden color, right? So the imagery, or the image that has been presented over here is that of gold blood here means, or the golden blood here means of royalty, তার aristocracy-টাকে বোঝাতে চাইছে. So this is an example of strained metaphor. Okay, so see the difference between simile and metaphor. You have to see this, you have to understand simple things. Both the simile and metaphor institute a comparison. Okay, simile and metaphor institute a comparison or show a similarity between two things or subjects of different kinds. Okay, দুটো opposite জিনিস, দুটো different জিনিসের মধ্যে comparison দেখায়, এটা similarity, right? But the comparison is not made in the same way. Okay, তাদের যে কম্পারিজনটা হচ্ছে সেটা একইভাবে হয় না. In case of the employment, in case of simile, the likeness or this similarity is clearly shown by the employment of what? By the employment of words like and as, or several other words were also used or are also used, but primarily these two words, as and like. Okay, these two words are used, and if you see these two words, then you will clearly understand that it is a simile. Okay, so this comparison, this likeness, this similarity in simile is clearly shown by the use of words like and as. But in metaphor, this resemblance, this similarity between the things or subject is kept implied. Okay, so what we find here is that simile differs from metaphor only in form and not in content. Okay, content wise tara different hobe na, content wise tara same. Okay, but how it is how the form is, okay, it will define whether it is a simile and metaphor. Okay, I am not going to confuse you, but it is for your knowledge only that I will show you some examples how this conversion can be made, how this similarity is there. Okay, for example, I use the example, the camel is the sheep of the desert, right? The camel is the sheep of the desert is an example of metaphor, but I can easily convert this line into simile. Okay, সেটা কি করে হবে? This will happen like this. When it is turned to simile, the line will be like, the camel crosses the desert just as the sheep crosses the sea. Okay, the camel crosses the desert just as the sheep crosses the sea. So what you see? You see the word as is used, as, right? The word as is used, and what we find? We find this point of comparison. What is that? Crossing a highly dangerous way or highly turbulent path, or highly a place which is not easily crossed. That can be a desert, that can be a sea. The mode of transport, সেই mode of transportation যে comparisonটা, that is being made clear in simile, right? Similarly, another word, another sentence of simile, if I choose, his heart is as hard as a stone. Okay, his heart is his heart, okay, হৃদয়, his heart is as hard as a stone. কি কম্পারিজন হলো? যে তার হৃদয়টা স্টোনের মতো হচ্ছে শক্ত। ওকে, তাহলে কম্পারিজন কম্পেয়ারিং পয়েন্টটা কি? হার্ডনেস। ওকে, হার্ডনেসটা কি? স্টোনের মধ্যেও আছে, তার হৃদয়ের মধ্যেও রয়েছে। ক্লিয়ার? সো if I turn this into a metaphor, it will be like this: he has a stony heart. He has a stony heart, HEARTSTONY. সে তার হার্টটা হচ্ছে stony. Obviously this is an example of metaphor where the hardness or the rigidity, this hardness, this quality of hardness is implied to the heart of that man. Clear? Similarly, another example, oh my love is like a red rose. So someone, the poet, is comparing his love or his beloved with a red rose. Okay, comparison to clear. Next, if we convert it to metaphor, what we will see? We see, oh my love is a red rose. So he is directly comparing. So the beauty which is clearly present over here is absent or taken away in the metaphor. Okay, so you can easily convert simile to metaphor and metaphor to simile only because these two are same in content. Okay, but their only difference is what? their only difference is that they differ in form. তাদের ফর্মে হচ্ছে শুধু ডিফার করা যায়, ক্লিয়ার? তাদের ফর্মটা হচ্ছে ডিফার করে, হাউ দে অ্যাকচুয়ালি প্রেজেন্ট ইট সেইটা ডিফর্ম করে। অ্যান্ড দ্য সিম্পলেস্ট ওয়ে টু ফাইন্ড আউট simile is to see whether you have these two words like or as in the sentence where two different things are compared. Okay, and in case of metaphor, what you have to find? You have to find out the point of comparison between these two opposite things, or the things that are put in a line. Those two things, what is the based, what is the comparing point of view. Okay, so this is the end of the class.